What's happening, buddy? In this video, I want to show you how you can do a floating testimonial. And the best part about this, if I then adjust the browser, it will then move based upon your design in a responsive way using Bootstrap. And with that, let's get started. All right, so to get started in this project, I did use the basic Bootstrap template. We can find that at getbootstrap.com. And if we scroll down the docs section, about halfway down the page is the starter template that I've just copied and pasted over here on the left-hand side. Now, in addition, the one thing I did change to start this project off with is I added this custom CSS file, which is just below the default Bootstrap CSS file, making sure to add the custom CSS second because that's the true word of the cascading style sheet. And the custom CSS file has absolutely nothing inside of it. So what we'll do is we're going to start building in an HTML first. It's going to look okay. We've got it right here at Hello World right now. And then we'll go into CSS and perform all the magic to make this truly shine. So to get started, I'm going to head down to where it says body. In here, I'm going to create some empty space just so we have some room to work with inside of this template. I'm going to type in div class, and I'm going to add a container. And just to push it off the top of the page, I'm going to use padding Y for the Y-axis, just if we do have it, have some padding on the top and on the bottom. And we'll add the spacing of 3 to this design. If I close it up, I'm going to build a 2-column. So for this project, I'm going to put my testimonial on the right-hand side of the column, or the end column per the rules of Bootstrap now. So what I'm going to do is I'll say div class row, and I'm going to add a 2-column design. So I'll say div class again, call LG, and then 6. Left, or should I say start column. And we're going to then have the second column, which I can copy and paste. And this will be the right. That's a good one. Let's try right. And end column. Now, if we save this, we should have is a left/start column and a right end column. We're going to work inside this right-hand side, and I can just, in theory, comment this one out and save. Make sure I got that and refresh. All working right now is this right end column. Awesome. And we can also take out the word hello world since we're not going to use that for right now. You can always bring it in later if you want, but I'm just going to comment it out. So hello world just disappears. The first thing I want to bring in is this picture. So in my images folder, also note that I did use a square graphic that I found on unsplash.com of this random guy with a cup of coffee and some tattoos. In here, inside this right column, I'm going to start out with, I'm going to build a testimonial area and then add this intro image. So under this where it says right end column, in here, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to say, I always do that. Let's do it that way. There we go. Div class, and we're going to call this one a testimonial. This will be more of our frame to hold our content. The next section is I'm going to add this intro image. So I'll say div class equals intro image, and inside the intro image is going to add our image. So we'll add image source equals images and that creative director.jpg. Inside that image, I also have to add the image fluid, because if I just have it like this, or if I save it right now, what's going to happen is that picture goes way off the screen. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'll say class and then equal image fluid. What the image fluid, which is based upon Bootstrap, will then make it based upon the full size of its parent or its div, which is in this case the column LG6. Don't forget to also add the alt information. So I'm going to say alt, and we'll call this guy a creative director, making up a random title. Now, if I save it, it should be totally fine. Now that we have this part set up to go, I then want to add an intro quote to this section down here. So outside of the intro image, I'm going to say div class intro quote. And inside the intro quote, we're going to use both of these in our CSS. I'm going to say div class, one more div. I know we got a lot of them going on here. div class intro quote content, intro quote content. And now is where all the magic happens. So inside this section, I'm going to move this guy a little bit further as best I can so I can still see him and type the code as much as I can. Now is where we're going to add our quote. So we're going to use the block quote. Let's bring in the proper HTML documentation. And in the block quote, I'm going to add a paragraph because if your design calls for multi-paragraphs, I like to bring in the paragraph tag just to add a bit of design tweak to it. So what I'm going to do is I've already got some lorem ipsum off to the side. So I'm just going to copy and paste the text. It looks like that. Lorem ipsum, looking great. And then I also need to add a site tag. So I want to add the name of who he is and the company, in this case, this is a more professional quote, of who he works for. I'm going to say site, and in here, I'm going to say Sean Smith, comma, and then I'll add the strong tags. Let's just do a little extra spacing just so we can see what we're working on here. And in the strong information, I'm going to add Microsoft, just so we have the name. Now, if I save this all, it'll look like this. There's no floating, there's no on top of the picture. There's just a picture, some text, and Sean Smith, Microsoft. That's okay. We have all the HTML in place that we need to have for then now we can go into CSS and truly make this sparkle. Whenever I work in CSS, I'm always thinking about if I come back to HTML, I'm always wanting to write my code from biggest to smallest, top to bottom, which means I try to focus on the testimonial first and then move down and down and down. So the block quote really becomes the last thing I'm going to code because I'm thinking about parent to child relationship. And that's how I write my CSS. In the custom CSS, let's add a testimonial class. And we'll say padding bottom 1 rem. I like the rems a lot. And position is going to be relative. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that whenever I write the word relative, that absolute is coming down the pipe. After the testimonial, I'm then going to work on the intro image. If we save this, take a quick look. Nothing's really changed. I just added a little padding at the very bottom down here, which we can't really see too much, but we'll see it down the road. Actually, it's way down here. Let's keep on going down the page. But we added a bit of padding below this entire design just for some extra space down the road. After the testimonial, I'm going to focus on the intro image. And with the intro image, I do need to set a certain width of a design of this. I don't want it to go outside. If I come over here for a second, I'm not wanting to cross over that proverbial space into the div. So if the text wants to float out outside of it, I have to push the picture back first. So, woof, that was a good one. Let's try width. That's better. I'm going to use 60% for the overall width of this intro image, and I'll add some space at the margin bottom. We'll add 2 rem, and we'll add a margin left because I want a little extra space to breathe on the left-hand side as well. So margin left, we're going to add as 1 rem. What that's going to do is do that. Make the picture a little smaller, tuck him in from the left and from the right, and so he holds. Don't forget that that's where your image fluid comes into play. Now that we have this part, we can then do a little bit with the actual image tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say intro image and then IMG. I don't like touching the IMG tag a lot, only because I try to work as much as I can with the parent before I work on the picture. In this case, I just want to round the border a little bit. So I'm going to say border radius and give a radius of 10 pixels. Save it. There it is. Rock and roll. If we continue down, now that we have this image mostly in place, I'm going to focus on the quote. So I'm going to say intro quote. And in here comes our position absolute because we want to put the text on top of the picture. So the intro quote, we're going to say width, and we're going to use the calc. This is one of my favorite tools in CSS, and I always try to find ways to use it if I possibly can. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say calculation is going to be 100% Come on, percentage key. There we go. Minus 4 rem. And I'll show you why down the road why I did it this way. And it's mostly because we can leverage the power of both a full percentage, but we can also use a certain number to move it around. So if I save this, it's not going to do much right now besides tuck it in a little bit over here. It's 100% minus 4 rem on the right hand side. Now the magic really starts to happen. I'm going to say position not inherent, absolute. We're going to say bottom is going to be 0. Left is going to be 3 rem. And this is because I'm leveraging the power of 4 rem and 3 rem. So it's really easy math. That's, to me, the most simplistic way I can possibly make it. The background color I do have to add is going to be white. And here's something I actually found on a different site that I absolutely love the way they built this drop shadow. This is going to be a little complex, so fasten your seatbelts. The filter I'm going to write for the drop shadow is going to be drop shadow. If I get all these parentheses right, it'll be a minor miracle, but let's see if I can get this thing all done. So the drop shadow is going to be 0, 16 pixels, 24 pixels, and an RGBA of 0, 0, 0.4, I'm sorry, 0. Told you I'd get these zeros wrong. 0.07. So it's a very light first part of it. After that, I'm going to add another drop shadow. So I'm going to hit the return key just so you can see it. I'm going to say drop shadow and another one. This one's going to be 0, 6 pixels, 30 pixels, and an RGBA of 0. Here we go, all the zeros again. 0, 0, and then 0.06 in this design. After this, we're going to do one more to kind of round it out a little bit. And we're going to say a drop shadow of 0. Sorry, that's right, zeros. Trying to make sure I don't mess up all the zeros in here. 0, and then 8 pixels, 10 pixels, RGBA of 0, 0, 0. We'll just do 0.1 for this one. Awesome. All those are in place. What it should look like, so far so good. We do one more. I'm going to add a border radius of 10 pixels, just so I can match the radius above to keep it consistent. Now when I save this, oh, check that out. That's looking pretty good. What's happening here is, what I like about this too, is this never goes to the edge or over that div. So it's always holding the space. And regardless of the absolute, it's not going to go past 100% minus 4 rem for the width. So no matter how long this gets, it'll always hold in place. So now we got this part. Let's continue on to the block quote. Awesome. So I'm going to scroll up this intro quote right here, and I'm going to add a block quote. No need for a period because we're actually using the block quote tag. After this, I'm going to say margin, and we'll say 1 EM0. After this, I want to set a line height. That was weird. I thought it was going to catch. Line height, that's better, of 1.45 EMs. I like using EMs on the line height because it'll move based upon the overall font size if I get bigger or smaller going forth here. So just so you can see what it looks like, all I did was add a little bit of margin on the top, and I just adjusted the lines between the spacing in here just a tad. Nothing much, but I just wanted a little extra space, just a tad in the line height. From here, I'm going to do is I'm going to say position relative. And again, you'll see how I use the absolute again for these to add the quotes in. And after that, we'll say color. And I found a gray quote look pretty good. So I use 38, not a $, 3838. That's the color I use just to give it a bit of a kick. And in the block quote, we'll then say padding and not auto. It doesn't catch the right thing. So padding left, we're going to add the 4 rem, and padding right 2 rem. The reason why it's going to be a little different is I have to add the quote on this left-hand side. So I want space for it in here. So to me, the 4 and 2 had a good balance because the quote actual symbol is going to sit right here on the left-hand side. Awesome. After this, we're going to say block quote and before. After this, we're going to say font family. And I have to use the actual Georgia font because it just has a really nice light curve to it. And we'll say Georgia serif in case the Georgia font doesn't work. The display is going to be block. The padding left, just a little bit of padding in here, will be 1 rem. And then for the content, since we can't type a quote in a quote, what we're going to have to do is we'll type quote and then backslash, if I can find the right key, 201C. Now what's going to happen from here, we'll say font size. My font size fit at 80 pixels for this design. So the 80 pixels will apply to the quote. And then we'll say position, absolute. Left will be 0. Top for my design was -20 pixels. Again, if using a different font or different style, you might have to adjust these numbers just a little bit. And color for this design is B2, B2, and B2. Now when I save it, it's not going to work. And that's because I didn't read my notes correctly. So what I actually did was, for this design to these numbers working better, I actually took out the line height and forgot to note that I did take it out. So when I take out this line height of the block quote, if I come back up here, it just drops right into position. Before, the line height was messing up the actual space, and all is good. And I just forgot to make a note of that in my original notes as I built this project. All right, block quote before. Now we're going to block quote after. Now that we have the block quote, this quote's right here, you'll note that I dropped in this actual quote without the quote marks. We have to bring it back. So what I'm going to do is, inside of the block quote paragraph, and this is why I write block quote P, because I want to affect all the paragraphs in all my design, I'm going to say after. I just realized I did not bring in the double colons in there. That's better. Block quote P double colon after. And after this, I just want to bring in a basic quote. So we're going to say font family. We're going to match it with Georgia and serif. And content is then going to be quotes space backslash 201D. 201C is the forward quote and 201D is the back quote. Now when I save this, I just want this to actually match the design, but notice how the end quote shows up right here at the very end, and there's just one space between to make the quote show up. Awesome. We have this one looking pretty good, but we need to fix the Sean Smith site piece just to change a little bit of the color to make it not so important, to make sure this stands out better. So what I'm going to do is, after the block quote P after, I'm going to say block quote and then say site. Site tag's pretty awesome this way. Color I'm going to use was 999. And the font size for my design, I used 14 pixels. And after that, display block to make sure it holds the space. And I used a margin top of 5 pixels, just an extra space in there. Perfect. Now Sean Smith got a little softer, and the quote is getting accentuated both from this hanging quote and the title being a lighter color. So everything points to the text that you want to read. Awesome. Now the last thing I want to do is that Sean Smith usually requires a dash at the end to delineate that this is a cited information. To me, I like using the end dash. It's a great between the size of a normal dash and an M dash. So let's do that. Let's add a block quote, and then we're going to cite this. And then right before, what we're going to do is we'll say content and then quotes. And then I use the option key and dash on my Macintosh, hit the space. And what that'll do is it'll just add the dash of Sean Smith to indicate the site of the information up above. awesome. This is looking fantastic. But the title of this project was responsive. And the problem is if we use this in a by default, whoa, problems just go haywire. So if we just had this on our iPhone, this would not look good. I can't see above it. It's just a complete mess. So I'm using Bootstrap, and I'm going to use the different media queries to move this around, because right now, by default, if we move our design, or in this case, our browser, it looks good. But as you can see, because that absolute tag, which is why I really don't like them, except in very specific situations, where it gets worse and worse and worse. And now this area clouds up this area. And what I want to do is I want to move all of this information down below. So I essentially want to stop that absolute from being absolute. Let's head down into our CSS and just scroll down a little bit. And we're going to add a media query. So at media, and the max width for this design. So we'll say max width : 1199.9898 px is what they recommend inside of Bootstrap. So from here, I'm going to adjust a couple things. The intro image is going to adjust a little bit. So I'm going to say intro image, and we're going to take off the margin as it gets a little smaller. So the intro image, the margin is going to go to 0, and the width will be initial. Initial. There we go. Hit the wrong IN from not inherit, but initial. Initial takes it back to its root state, which is default nothing. If we then refresh the page, what's going to happen is as we break these sizes, the picture will readjust right here to a full width approach. So we're kind of taking out the pieces we had above by going into the mobile friendly, more tablet design at this point in time. Well, obviously he's kind of getting crowded by this testimonial. So what I want to do is we're going to move the testimonial down the page. So after the intro image, we would then want to do the intro image. So the intro image IMG tags, because I want this testimonial to sit down below the picture, I don't need the border radius on the bottom part. So what I have to do here is I'm going to say border radius 0, and then I'm going to say border top left radius of 10 pix and border top right radius of 10 pixels. Now when I save it, you'll see that the top, if we scroll up, is still rounded on the top left and the top right, but the bottom becomes flat. So after the intro image, what I want to do is then type in intro quote. So the intro quote, we're going to add a border radius of 0 to knock them out by default. And then we'll add the position of initials. We're taking out the absolute right here. I like to take things out first, then bring them back second. The width will also become initial, taking it back to its root, which is basically nothing. And the padding, I want to give as a 1 rem 0, which means the top and bottom is going to get some padding inside the intro quote, and the left and right will not. The filter is going to go away since it's not going to be the same filter as it was. So we're going to say filter. Ooh, filter, that's a good one, is initial. And in here, the border bottom head has to show up. So the border bottom left radius will go first at 10 pixels, and the border bottom right radius will go next at 10 pixels. Now when I save this, what's going to happen is that'll show up right down here. Just want to make a little more adjustment to the block quote. So right after the intro quote, I'm going to say block quote. I'm going to take off the margin, say margin 0, and padding right will become 2 rem, just to make sure it's going to hold. And so far, that's looking really good. Now we're missing one critical component, and that's the actual drop shadow around this design, since we can't see the border radius going on right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll back up and we're going to add it to the testimonial, the media query. So I'm going to come up here, and where the intro quote is, I'm going to copy this filter by copying it right here. And then if I come down to the media query right after the max width and before the intro image, I'm going to add a testimonial. When I drop in the filter, now check out what happens. Oh, that looks gorgeous. Now we have a responsive design. So if we have it right here, now what happens is it moves back and forth, and then as it gets to a certain size, it just drops down below inside of this picture. And you can see right here, it's almost too big. So here's one more problem I wanted to tackle. This overall max width is just ginormous because there is no maximum size. So inside the testimonial, what I like to do is I like to say max width. I gave it a width of 450 pixels. That's just going to overall make the size be the correct size inside this design. So now when it moves, it's overall holding with a complete fine size. And when it gets to that mobile size, so I'm going to go to inspect. Now the size doesn't go above and beyond the constraints, and it holds successfully. And now we have our finished floating testimonial being responsive.